Hello, and thank you all for joining the Awin Client Partnerships team as we review the latest numbers from across the network. Last time you joined us was early April, and the lockdown was relatively new. We'd seen spikes across gym equipment, wine, and broadband sectors as customers made sure they had everything they needed for comfortable home living. So, what's changed? What new trends have we seen? In this webinar, we review the data from across the network for the whole of April, and with a focus on the bank holiday weekend. We also start to think about life after lockdown and include predictions about how changes in customer behaviour now could impact the industry long term. My name is Ros Beresford, the Client Partnerships Director here at Awin UK, and I'm joined again by Joelle Hillman, our Retail and Travel Client Partner, and Alex Palmer-Yee, our Telco and Finance Client Partner. I'm also pleased to introduce Jessica Brown, our new Agency Partner, who will take us through some of the cross-sector trends we've seen over April. Many thanks for your engagement and questions last month. You can again ask questions as we discuss the insights, and we've put aside some time at the end to be able to answer them. You do so by using the small toolbar that appears in the middle of the screen and select the Show Q&A icon. A chat bar will open up on the side of the screen for you to type your question or comment. You can also upvote questions submitted by others. So to kick things off, I'll hand over to Joelle to take us through some of the key insights across the retail and travel sectors.
Thank you, Ros. As most of you all know, Awin have offices in 15 territories, tracking activity in 180 countries and over 21,000 partners in the travel space alone. However, it will be no surprise to anyone listening to hear that performance over the sector is still significantly down. 92% down in terms of bookings versus April the previous year. That does mean, however, that across travel subsectors, from flights to car hire, we are tracking some activity across the globe. And whilst overall volumes are down, some KPIs are up. In the month of April, across all territories, our travel AOV went up 25%. And whilst many consumers are purchasing less, those who are spending more on average per booking. ROI has also gone up for those brands able to invest in the channel throughout April, from €20 to close to €23. If you tuned in last month, you'll remember that we analysed the lag time between purchase date and trip date from one OTA passing us back this data through the Awin custom parameter function. We found that the lag time between booking date and stay date had increased slightly by around 30 days. However, in April, we saw this increase again, and substantially. Looking at March versus April 2020, the time between booking and stay date went up to an average of 253 days. This is 79% up versus the previous month. Bookings are being made right up to September next year. In terms of location, the top destination remains to be Spain, and the largest proportion of flights as part of holiday packages are being booked through Ryanair and EasyJet. Traffic is also down, minus 76% year on year, though not as significant in the drop in bookings as consumers continue to research and plan for the possibilities of travelling again post-COVID-19. Looking at the traffic trends specifically, we have seen a shift in those publisher types responsible for driving overall traffic share to our travel clients across the globe. Offer and loyalty publishers were responsible for 15% of travel sector traffic in April 2020. This proportion has almost halved from April 2019. The majority of this share has been picked up by content, bloggers, influencers, and display and email partners have also seen an increase in traffic share in the travel sector. It's clear right now that consumers' needs have shifted from deals and offers to information and advice. Existing and potential new customers need trusted sources offering up-to-date information on the latest travel regulations. As well as information, our travellers also want visual inspiration. And it's no coincidence that the likes of Pinterest and Instagram have seen double-digit growth in terms of platform usage. If you haven't yet seen the video that went viral of a TikTok user using his own washing machine to recreate an on-flight experience, I suggest you have a Google. But it's a case in point that we're all still dreaming of that next holiday. On the 6th of April, the Foreign Office advised against all non-essential travel indefinitely. And a month on, that message still stands. Not only do we see travel companies taking their own stance in terms of timeframes and logistics for the future, but consumers are also forming their own opinions. A survey by the IATA, the International Air and Transport Association, found that 40% of people would have reservations when it comes to flying post-COVID, and will be waiting at least 6 months to fly again once those restrictions are lifted. Delta Airlines CEO wrote a letter to all employees predicting it could take up to 2 to 3 years for a full business recovery. With my own summer holiday, including my wedding booked for July 2020, now looking unlikely, I've been looking for the positives when it comes to travel predictions for the rest of this year. What is most important to consumers right now is their health, followed by their friends and family. If the UK government announcement at the end of this week offers some softer rules when it comes to social distancing with close friends and family, I think we will likely not only see this inject some well-needed positivity across our nation, but also across our travel sector. As we slowly begin to regain normality and the consumer confidence rises, I believe we will likely see an increase in staycations and remote accommodation bookings, such as self-contained cabins with small groups of families over the end of the summer. As we know, the whole of Europe is still predominantly in lockdown, with some rules tighter than others. Throughout April, while social distancing continues, we have seen some restriction ease for some of our European neighbours, particularly across some of those countries in stricter isolation conditions than that of the UK. On the 13th of April, Spain saw hundreds of thousands able to return to work. On the 20th of April, Germany saw the opening of small businesses, including florists, bookstores and bike shops. And on the 26th of April, Italy announced plans for a phase 2 on their lockdown ease. As a result, just this week, they saw the reopening of bars and restaurants offering takeaway services, and building sites and factories also reopened. I've taken a look at some of the performance trends in April versus the previous month across the specific categories within travel. To my surprise, Spain, Italy and Germany have seen an 18% drop in flight bookings month on month compared to the UK, who have only seen a 12% drop in performance month on month. For hotels and accommodation bookings, these are down 17% for Italy, Spain and Germany in April versus March. However, the UK saw a bigger drop, down 25%. And as we look at more localised travel, the gap in performance across these markets widens. For coach bookings, the UK saw a 23% decrease in bookings in April. However, Spain, Italy and Germany saw a much smaller 4% drop month on month. And for tourist attractions and tickets, those European territories saw a 59% increase in bookings, whilst the UK saw just a 3% increase. My assumption here is that the lifting of some restrictions across Italy, Germany and Spain, even if their overall conditions are still stricter than the UK, have created a sense of, or a psychology of confidence across these markets, in local travel at least. Consumers are beginning to consider trips and activities to look forward to in the near future. As mentioned, I predict the restriction ease in the UK will also see a similar trend in local travel as we have seen in these other European countries. Moving from travel trends, and looking to the retail market specifically in the UK. If we cast our memory back to the April Easter bank holiday, as well as sunshine and Easter eggs, the long weekend also brought us sales. As most shops in the UK are still closed, Statista reported an 86% decrease in footfall across all UK high streets this Easter versus Easter 2019, unsurprising in the current conditions. Looking at the graph here, the blue bar depicts performance from Thursday to Monday, bank holiday weekend, whilst the grey bar depicts the previous weekend. The dot above each bar demonstrates the percentage increase or decrease per product category. Green seeing growth, red seeing a decline. As you can see, clothing and fast-moving consumer goods are the largest sectors in terms of number of sales within retail, closely followed by health and beauty and sportswear. Clothing, health, beauty and sportswear, and even women's wear all struggled in March, but saw an increase across the bank holiday weekend. And we'll go on to cover clothing and beauty trends in more detail in subsequent slides. Sportswear, erotic, furniture, jewellery and menswear saw some of the largest increases week on week in terms of sales. Toys, games, gifting and alcohol saw some of the biggest drops in terms of sales over the bank holiday weekend. My assumption here is that these products were ordered ahead of the weekend and consumers wanted to spend the bank holiday actively enjoying and not shopping for the likes of gifts, alcohol and toys. In terms of AOV changes across the UK retail landscape over bank holiday weekend, we saw the biggest jump in audio-visual, from £171 to £278 AOV. One of the largest performers here was selling large TVs as well as some pricey white consumer goods. Home and garden also saw a jump in AOV, up to £88, which was a £20 jump. In terms of conversion rate across the UK retail landscape on bank holiday weekend, we saw FMCG converting at a huge 16%. It's worth noting the big fast food deliveries are driving this rate up. This was closely followed by lingerie at 12% conversion rate over the weekend and gifts and flowers converting at 10%, though as mentioned, their overall sales volumes were down week on week. So what about retail in other markets? Moving out of the UK view specifically, we've taken a look at some of our retail categories across the whole globe to see which of our core territories are seeing the biggest increases and the biggest decreases. We've found some interesting and, dare I say, fun statistics to share with you all from the month of April. Looking at dating and socialising, the UK have seen the biggest increase in this subsector, up 14% month on month, whilst Benelux and Germany saw a decline at 18% and 15%. Whilst the UK stay home and look to online dating for entertainment, we see our Spanish neighbours stock up on lingerie. Sales in this sector increased by 315% in Spain last month. The health and beauty sector saw increases across almost every market except Brazil. However, APAC stole the show here, up over 1,000% in terms of health and beauty sales in April. In terms of credit cards, we saw our highest application increases in April across Eastern Europe, up 90% versus the previous month. It seems that our Brazilian and Spanish friends are some of the most generous amongst us. Both markets saw triple-figure growth across the gifts and flowers sector in April. In fact, every territory saw a month-on-month increase across gifting and flowers, except the UK, though I think it's safe to assume this is as a result of the UK Mother's Day falling in March. As we all continue to stock up on alcohol whilst at home, we found that Switzerland was the only market to see a decrease across wine, spirit and tobacco sales in April, down 19% versus March, whilst our global average is currently up 18%. Switzerland are focusing on staying fit, along with Germany and Austria, who saw an 80% increase in sports equipment sales month on month. This performance was shortly followed by the UK and USA. And lastly, every territory is focused on looking fit, with increases in sportswear sales across the globe. The US saw our biggest spike, up 134% in sportswear versus April the previous month. As mentioned, the whole clothing sector saw strong performance across April in the UK. As a whole, we saw clothing up 51% versus the previous month and an outstanding 36% up year on year. I wanted to look into the performance changes across the UK fashion sector in a bit more detail, right from the beginning of lockdown to date. There are a lot of numbers on this slide, so I'm going to take a minute to talk you through it. The columns depict key dates and announcements over the last 2 months, and the rows showcase the different subsectors within fashion. As you can see, the first column, prior to any government announcement or changes to the way in which we live our lives, performance across the fashion sector this year started strong. Women's wear, menswear, children's wear and sportswear were all trending up in terms of number of sales versus 2019. However, on the 16th of March, the government broadcasted their first live announcement in the UK and advised us to refrain from all unnecessary travel. The days following this announcement, we saw a shift in performance across the sector. Women's wear, menswear and children's wear slumped, driving less than half the performance we had seen in 2019. Sportswear continued to see a year-on-year increase, though nowhere near as substantial as how we started the year. The second announcement to the UK landed on the 26th of March. The population was asked to stay home. Our high streets, including shops, gyms, bars and restaurants, shut down. That week, Women's wear saw a slight increase in the performance from the previous week, though still trending downwards at negative 36%. Menswear told a similar story. Whilst it hadn't completely recovered to the levels of performance at the beginning of the year, it had seen an increase on the previous week, trending just 15% down. Children's wear and sportswear, however, saw vast improvements in the number of sales, up 20% and 105% year on year. April saw our first full month as a nation in lockdown, and as isolation life became the new normal, our shopping habits returned in full flow. Menswear saw a 52% increase month on month, seeing April performance top April 2019 by 42%. Women's wear saw a 25% increase month on month from March, just shy on April 2019 performance by 6%. For women's wear in particular, on a brand level, the brands driving the overall sector growth tend to target a younger female demographic, with a lower price point paired with continued offered messaging. Many of these brands are also pure play advertisers. The publisher My Uni Days recently shared some insight into the student market. 77% of students have moved back to family homes for lockdown, and with their student loans still dropping in April, their disposable income is up and student AOV is on the rise. I would confidently predict that we will continue to see women's wear increase in terms of performance across May and June. As the government begin to relax social distancing rules and allow for some socialisation across family and friends, we will begin to fill up our summer social calendars again, and our summer wardrobes will follow suit. Children's wear saw a 59% increase in April versus the turbulent performance in March. April was up a huge 87% versus the previous year. And last, but by no means least, sportswear continues to boom. April was up 73% versus March and a huge 156% year on year. I predict sportswear will continue to grow, but I'm not sure how much longer we can continue to see triple-digit growth in this sector. That said, it's not just clothing within the sporting category that is doing well. If you've opened your app store recently, you will have seen they are flooded with running and training applications. If you've switched on the news recently, you would have heard our government advising us to exercise for an hour a day. And a lot of us, including myself, would have been nominated for the 5K run in April as part of the Run for Heroes campaign. So run 5, donate 5 and nominate 5. This campaign was actually initiated by a girl aged 27 who set out to raise just 5K with friends and family for the NHS. The strength of this campaign alone shows us that as a nation, we were definitely in need of sportswear in April. It went viral across the UK and has topped over £5 million in donations. We've all adapted to new forms of exercise, and mostly for free. I believe that these newly formed habits across the UK will continue, and sportswear will continue to be a hot trend throughout 2020 and beyond.
Thanks, Joelle. So it seems that most of us are regretting not getting that trim in early March. Google searches for clippers increased fivefold throughout April, and Amazon temporarily sold out. Nikki Clark stepped in to help and gave the nation hairstyling and cutting advice live on the BBC. But what else has been happening in April in the health and beauty sector? The graph shows sales across the sector from February to April, comparing this year in turquoise to last year in grey. Prior to any government announcements about COVID-19, the sector was trending pretty flat year on year, with just one clear spike on Valentine's Day. However, post-COVID-19, we saw this trend shift, and you can see the clear jump in sales from mid-March. Looking at overall year-on-year volumes for these advertisers across the network, they were up 57% in April compared to 2019. So what products or brands are driving this growth? Despite the increase in sales volumes, when looking at data from the 16th of March onwards, we saw the average order value for the sector drop slightly to £47, which is 12% down versus the same period last year. This is echoed by a reduction in volumes of sales from luxury beauty brands. When looking at new customer data from one large beauty retailer, we can see these customers are moving online to buy skincare and sun cream. However, the biggest spike shown on the graph are actually in the health sector. The March spike was on the 20th, which was the day the pubs, restaurants and shops were asked to shut, and big spikes were seen across many sectors that day. Looking at the April spike, that was actually driven by the move into hay fever season, and one advertiser in particular offering a great deal on hay fever tablets, which got picked up by Money Saving Expert. The move towards healthcare online isn't new, but is certainly an area to keep a close eye on in the future. Good deals on hay fever tablets may be a simple example, but there have also been surges in demand for healthcare apps such as MyGP, who offer video GP consultations and have seen a huge 1,500% spike in demand since the pandemic began. The NHS actually has the goal of every patient having the right to online GP consultations by 2024, which should offer the opportunity for any medicines prescribed from such consultations to be purchased online too. The COVID crisis may therefore just be the start of consumer habits changing and a real healthcare revolution in the UK. We therefore predict this year-on-year increase that we're seeing in April will continue to grow. Are we still eating takeaway? So the BBC reported that we're definitely eating chocolate, with chocolatiers seeing 4 times their usual online demand this Easter. But as well as enjoying mountains of Easter eggs, we are still splurging on the weekend takeaway, particularly while the restaurants are still closed. When we look at the data from a month ago, we saw that despite increases in takeaway orders generally, we still hadn't had a single day that reached a Valentine's Day peak, and the April data does tell the same story. The chart shows the weekend takeaway volumes in lockdown compared to Valentine's Day. The first turquoise bar shows the peak year to date, which is Friday the 14th of February. However, we're getting closer to overtaking this. Previously, Saturday the 28th of March was the second highest day of the year in terms of takeaway orders, but now Saturday the 18th of April, shown here in bright blue, has surpassed that and is only 4% below Valentine's Day volumes. In comparison, the Easter weekend, which is shown in purple, was relatively low. It seems the good weather that weekend encouraged us to break out the barbecue instead of ordering a takeaway, or perhaps roll up our sleeves and home cook an Easter roast. As we move towards summer, we would therefore predict to see takeaway volumes start to drop again, or move towards other areas in food delivery where we are seeing sharp rises in demand. So chocolate and takeaway is certainly one of the only food trends in April, with some new customers still struggle to place home delivery orders with the big supermarkets, and other grocers encouraged to shop in store to save the delivery stocks for the more vulnerable customers. This led to many more of us looking to smaller niche food retailers to fill our fridges. These range from healthy meal subscription suppliers to specialty coffee companies and weekly veg boxes. Awin data shows the FMCG sector as a whole was up 49% in April, but this can be broken down further to get more of a grasp of specific changes in consumer habits in regards to food purchasing. There are a number of alternative food delivery companies active on the network, seeing considerable year-on-year increases in volume. This graph demonstrates the scale of this increase across our meal subscription retailer, who saw a huge jump from February to March of 186% on average, and strong volumes continuing in April. We've seen a slight drop, but they're still seeing much higher than pre-COVID levels. And this performance is due to both large increases in traffic and strong conversion rates, which doubled. The success is echoed across the specialty drink sector. After initial growth in March, April was even stronger, perhaps as we try to recreate our favourite daily drink takeaway experiences at home. And talking of drinks, yes, we are still enjoying that glass of wine. The wine, spirit and tobacco sector was again up year on year, but this time just 4%. So we're somewhat easing off compared to the big spikes we saw in March, and also our European neighbours, as Joelle touched on. We predict that this diversification and move away from normal shopping habits will continue, encouraged by the success of these new relationships, with both publishers and customers continuing to branch out and not be scared to try less well-known smaller brands. I'm now going to hand over to Jessica, our new agency partner, to explore the idea of diversification across the affiliate industry in more detail.
Thanks, Roz. Hi, everyone. Awin launched the performance tracker as part of our coronavirus hub, which shows which sectors are growing and declining throughout the pandemic. The tracker highlights that most retail subsectors are growing despite some large retail brands pausing programs or reducing spend. This is due to substantial increases in performance by many smaller niche retailers that are more than filling the gaps. When looking at April data across the network, we can split activity between our two main advertiser segments, SME and brand. SME represents small and medium-sized businesses and therefore the more niche and diverse retailers, as opposed to some of the larger nationally recognised brands. Commission-wise, spend share between the two shows that there has been 5% increase in SME advertisers year on year. This is in addition to the year-on-year growth in commission spend overall for both segments. The analytics platform SimilarWeb also tells us that they're seeing increases in searches on page 2 to 3 of Google. As some larger retailers struggle to meet demand for some of the products that are seeing large spikes, customers are lengthening the search for smaller niche online suppliers. This is particularly true for electronics and office supplies, where increases have been prominent since mid-March. For example, there have been more generic non-branded searches for laptops, a trend that has risen to the levels of Black Friday peak, compared to Brand Plus laptop, which are seeing much smaller increases. This shows that customers are perhaps less brand sensitive than previously. We predict that this trend will continue, with publishers and customers building on these new relationships formed during COVID, and therefore leading to the continued diversification of the industry. Fueled by this newfound brand diversity and a large increase in publisher applications we are seeing due to Amazon pulling back from the channel, Awin are developing network tools and processes that support faster activations for publishers onto the vast reach of advertisers on the platform. The industry diversification insights that we've uncovered in the last slide led us to want to find out more, particularly what new customer data looked like across the network and how these new publisher relationships were affecting new customer share. Research from October 2019 showed that 71% of customers usually prefer to make a first-time purchase in-store, and more recent research by Internet Retailing found that 25% of shoppers said they had tried new online retailers because of the lockdown. These customers also intended to continue to shop with the new retailers thanks to the good experience they've had during the crisis. This trend rises to 32% for Gen Z and 35% of millennials, respectively. However, the older generation do seem harder to convince, with 43% of baby boomers saying they hadn't tried new online retailers during the pandemic. The research supports that the forced closure of physical stores means advertisers are acquiring new online customers like never before, many of which could be making their first ever online purchase, which brings up questions about how potential new customers behave. Are we willing to choose a new brand online or move online to one we already know? And which verticals are gaining the most new customers? Applying this theory across the Awin network, although not all advertisers pass us back new customer data to be able to share a total market view, we can look across multiple advertisers' performance within key sectors. From the data, we have delved into growing sectors that do track new versus existing customer information to see how the share of each has changed during the pandemic. The pie charts show the percentage of new and existing customers for advertisers by sector, comparing April in 2019 and 2020. As you can see, beauty sector advertisers show an increase from 27% to 38% in new customers, whilst the home and garden sectors see new customer volumes remain relatively static. The electrical sector, however, sees the biggest change, with an increase from 8% of sales in April 2019 to 25% in April 20, coming from first-time customers. From this insight, our prediction is that brands can retain these new customers as online customers if they treat them well during COVID lockdown. This means optimizing a customer experience with publishers when finding the brand, having an easy purchase journey on the brand site with no availability issues and multiple payment options, as well as the delivery not being too delayed, and receiving good aftercare. It also highlights an opportunity for publishers to grow member bases and build relationships with new customer demographics, as we see an influx of potentially first-time online shoppers. I'll now hand over to Alex to review one of the lockdown's biggest launches and take another look at what's happening in the broadband space.
Thank you. Just a reminder that there is still time to submit questions through the Q&A section, as the telco section will be the final topic covered. So, as just mentioned, there was a major launch during the lockdown. The brand new iPhone SE launched in April. However, after a muted S20 launch, which Samsung partially attributed to the coronavirus, but potentially was also impacted by the success of the iPhone 11 last year, it was going to be interesting to see if the power of the Apple brand was still able to drive those volumes whilst we were all stuck inside. The new iPhone SE was clearly targeted at a more budget consumer, with its £420 starting price point, probably trying to tempt those who may have held on to their aging phone, possibly with a cracked screen, and tempt them over to embracing the latest Apple technology. There were no queues on Regent Street, but across the affiliate channel, the launch got off to a strong start, with over 600 pay monthly contract orders for the iPhone SE in the first 2 days. Now, for context, the Galaxy S20 hit less than 400 sales in its first 2 weeks. The iPhone SE is at the moment currently the best-selling handset across the Awin network, with it currently accounting for 1 in 3 handset contract sales. Following on from the pre-order spike, there was also the usual release date increase. So there was the pre-order period was 1 week, and when the release happened, we did see another spike. However, the biggest spike in this pre-order launch period was actually well after the pre-order period. It was on the 29th of April. Now, looking into the reason behind this was the day that a lot of payday newsletters are sent by publishers across the network. And although newsletters and exposure have been important in previous iPhone launches, this spike size would suggest that an increase in the importance of this exposure during the lockdown period. And I suppose this is unsurprising, as the lack of channels such as out of home and other physical channels, which are usually so key in driving demand for new phone launches, just showed that online was more important in reaching potential customers. And as such, advertisers should consider and elevate the importance of the reach of publisher exposure across the Awin network for future key campaigns, as this shows it can be really effective in driving awareness when you're missing some of those physical channels. However, despite the success of the iPhone SE, the pay monthly market is still 15% down. So in terms of the future implications from the iPhone SE launch, it probably is a bit less COVID driven, but I would expect the iPhone SE to continue to sell well, as we saw with the previous version of the iPhone SE, and it will potentially allow Apple to regain some of that market share from the more budget-friendly Android devices. There may be more of a need to focus on budget-friendly devices in the future, however, as the economic situation changes after the pandemic crisis. So in terms of broadband, last month I spoke about the spikes within the space that were driven by the lockdown announcements. Now, you'll be pleased probably to know that the market has now leveled out. And actually during the lockdown period, the sector is up 2% year on year. That being said, it is a lot lower than the 20% year on year growth that we were seeing in 2020 prior to lockdown. That being said, there could be future spikes once engineer capacity is freed up, following on from that spike that we spoke about last month. However, the trend that I'd actually like to highlight today is a potential acceleration of one that we've been sort of expecting for some time, and that's the final demise of copper, otherwise known as ADSL broadband. Now, since the lockdown, ADSL's share of the broadband market has continued to dip and is now below 10%, compared to nearly 20% in January. Now, this is despite ADSL being a cheaper product that requires no engineers to install. Now, fiber optic broadband is benefiting. However, the mix of the type of fiber plugging this gap suggests it's not the lower cost fiber products that are benefiting, but it's actually the more premium superfast products that have gained the most share, with it currently trending at over 50%. There have been strong offers in this space, but we're seeing this trend across a mix of different providers at different price levels, which suggests that consumers are prioritizing quality and speed over price, and this trend is becoming more and more apparent. So in the future, copper is likely to continue to decline, and potentially it could mean that copper broadband is no longer actively promoted in the channel, a big deviation from a few years ago when it was the dominant, and it may soon go the way of dial-up broadband. So the main thing to consider is, if your messaging is calling out fiber as a premium product, it's important to reposition and reconsider how consumers are now viewing faster internet products. April has certainly been an interesting month, and one like no other, both in terms of online shopping trends and for our everyday lives. We've put aside some time to answer the questions that you submitted, but alternatively, if you have some trends or new activity across the affiliate space you'd like to discuss, do let us know. If you haven't asked a question, you can do so using the toolbar. I know there are many that have been submitted already. I will now go and open up the questions and begin the moderation. Cool. Sorry, I just had a dry throat there. Cool. So this first question, and this is the most upvoted question currently, I will direct this one at Joelle. How can Awin support the brands that have physical stores when the lockdown is lifted?
Yeah, great question. I think everyone, I presume all brands out there, especially those that are running online and on the high street, are having to start to answer these questions internally. So as a channel, we really want to make sure that we are here to support you guys. Obviously, I think the opening of stores will definitely be a phased approach. And something that a lot of our publishers will be able to support with will be geofencing or geolocation targeting, and actually sending push notifications to consumers and potential consumers in the areas in which the stores are starting to reopen again. So not only can we push marketing messaging in terms of this store's reopened again, or these are the new products that are launched in this store, but we could also support with customer messaging around social distancing shopping. So making sure as customers do come to the store, they understand the rules and regulations that they still need to adhere to. Once this is all over and we're less concerned about the volume of consumers entering stores and it is business as usual, we can definitely start to, again, just push more customers and new customers into store, and perhaps with the like of click and collect messaging. But again, any exclusives that you guys have in store, I suppose what consumers are probably missing most at the moment is experiences in store, and so anything like that we can also support with. I don't know if Jess had anything to add on that, just with her previous background publisher side.
Yeah, definitely. I think geotagging publishers are sort of very good for pushing in-store messaging. And again, like a multi-channel approach, if you've got that new influx of online customers, it's a good way to make them aware of an in-store product if you put an offer out there that applies to online and in-store. So that's a really good way to sort of convert those new online customers to in-store customers as well, which kind of relates to what we were talking about.
That's great. So this question, I think some of it was asked halfway through the presentation, so I think some of it has been partially answered. I'm going to direct this one at Ros, because I know she talked about some health and beauty sector trends. But in the health and beauty sector, so the person says that they were really interested to hear about the healthcare trends increasing, and they're particularly keen on hearing about how the practical beauty sector is performing. So that's things like soaps, razors, and more lifestyle products. And are there any trends that we're sort of seeing in terms of AOV? And then I think Jess covered about the openness of potentially a bit of this, but are consumers more open to trying new to market brands here?
Right, lots of questions in that one. So I think definitely on the last point, yes, that is what we're seeing. We've seen that shift in share move from brand to the SME business. So we do still see more share of the network coming from brand, but there's a shift going towards the SME in terms of sales volume. So there's definitely people that are more open to trying new brands. In terms of the beauty side of things in particular, yeah, when we've delved into the product level information, there's a definite shift towards things like bath products, soap, sun cream, skincare, I suppose a slightly more practical side of beauty compared to the more expensive perfumes or makeup or the bigger brand name products that we see out there. So there is that definite divide in the data. As per the new and existing customer information, we don't have this in quite the scale that we do the general sales volumes. It depends the information that advertisers pass back to us. So we look at a number of them and group them together to get those types of trends. But where we have been able to see that, there's that definite shift between the more practical beauty and the more luxury.
Thank you for that, Ros. This question I'm going to direct to myself, and it follows the news today that O2 and Virgin Media are merging. And the question is, do you think that the O2 Virgin Media merger was influenced by COVID-19? I think it's a really interesting question, and but I think the key thing to be aware of is that the telecom sector is one that's always been full of these mergers and acquisitions there. I think O2, I think potentially like originated from actually a previous cable and wireless subsidiary, which is now part of Liberty Global, and so I think it shows that which own Virgin Media. So it shows how interlinked the telco sector often is, and we had obviously BT Group buying EE as well a few years ago. So I don't think it's a new trend really within the sector, and I'd question whether it was influenced by COVID. I guess the thing to consider is the strengths of each company. So I think O2 obviously a huge mobile company, and they don't necessarily operate within the broadband space, whereas Virgin Media they do obviously have the Virgin Mobile MVNO, but I think they're obviously really strong in broadband, and so potentially it's about leveraging those two strengths and making a sort of better sort of journey. I think I wrote an article last month about the emergence of 5G, and I think as 5G and new technologies and super fast broadband become more important, I think it's more important for telecoms to offer these more unified sort of solutions to customers. And so I think, although maybe think the COVID-19 stuff has maybe sort of made them think a little bit more about keeping the nation connected, I'd sort of say that I can't imagine it's the main driving factor there from that side. Cool. I've got another question here, which I will direct to Joelle, which is, how are brands creating content across their sales funnel, and are influencers useful in supporting this?
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing a rise in content and influencers. So we're seeing that across the Awin network in terms of share of traffic. I know I mentioned that in travel, but we've seen that across most fashion and beauty as well. And then just generally from the statistics I'm reading from Instagram themselves, they've seen a huge increase in consumers spending time on Instagram, how much time they are spending, but also influencers themselves in terms of the numbers of live videos or stories or pictures that they're also posting. So one, I suppose we're all at home, we have more time to be absorbing this sort of content, but two, I think people want to use it as a bit of an escapism and have some inspiration. I think as well, there's been quite a lot of surveys recently that we've seen from marketing companies around how consumers feel about brands marketing at this time, and consumers are really for it. You know, they want to look to their trusted brands for advice, for information, but also inspiration at this time. So I think in terms of how they're creating content, a lot of the brands are changing their messaging. So, for example, beauty brands are talking less about glam looks for going out and talking more about home practicalities, and like Ros mentioned, we've seen a rise in skincare and in more home beauty treatments. We've seen a lot of the electrical stores change their messaging in terms of like how to build your own home office, for example. And the same in fashion. You know, a lot of the younger brands are talking about home chic, how to still look business appropriate on webcam and smart casual. So really adapting their messaging to this time. I think relevancy is key always, but specifically throughout this time when we're creating content. And I also think we just need to support the customers. So not only does our messaging need to be relevant, but it needs to be sensitive as well to the current climate. And I suppose creating that ethos that the brands are there for their consumers, but also we're all in this together, and this is a shared experience.
Thank you for that. We have a question here, which does Awin anticipate a challenging impact to online channels once the high street bounce back hits the UK? So we've obviously talked about how the sector has been, how retail merchants like the sector has been growing, but I guess it's whether is this a short-term trend? Ros, do you want to go and take this one?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because it is really just sort of predicting and estimating based on what we've seen so far. I think that people are forced online at the moment. They really can't shop on the high street. The shops just aren't open outside of some of the essential stores. But the fact that they have come online, and some of the areas we discussed about these new relationships forming, people are testing it out, trying brands that they might not have tried before, shopping online when they haven't before. People will go back to the high street. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But some people will stay online because they've enjoyed the experience, or stay online for certain types of products that they maybe hadn't considered before. So I don't think everybody that's shopping now will potentially stay online. I don't think some of the spikes will stay and continue to grow. But I think where we go back to, my prediction would be that it is slightly higher or further forward in terms of people shopping online than it was previously. I mean, some of the stats we've looked at is, you know, 20-25% of shopping's online, whereas vast majority is so far in store and on the high street. And I think it'd be really interesting to see what those percentages look like when this is all over. I can imagine that we will hopefully go back to maybe 30%, 35% being online.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I imagine as well there's obviously benefits of the online channel, which I guess may become more important, I guess, after depending on what the economic outlook is from that side. Because I think online, being able to shop and compare online is potentially a way that consumers can save sort of money and stuff. And I know obviously the economic situation may be quite different after the pandemic and after everything reopens from that side. It leads on to a question which says, are there any insights into the finance sector? So in general, since last time we talked about how the insurance sector was generally relatively level, but it was obviously down year on year. That generally hasn't changed, and we haven't seen an uplift there. However, if there are any specific finance sector updates, we are looking to obviously go and release more insights over the coming weeks and stuff. But if there are anything specific, do feel free to email myself or the UK Client Partnerships team, and I'll be able to go and have a look into that. And the email address is on the screen at the moment. So this is a retail based question. So I think Joelle might be one worth you sort of answering. Have all Awin merchants extended their product return windows?
So off the top of my head, I'm not sure if everyone has, but I certainly know that this topic has come up a lot. And even just from personal shopping online, I have seen that a lot of the brands are talking about extended windows in terms of allowing returns, just because we know that the postal service is down and people aren't able to return in store. Even the likes of store gift cards, the extension on those deadlines for spending those gift cards have been extended. And I suppose the way in which it's impacted us slightly within the channel is having to look at the validations period as a result of that returns window. So where consumers are giving longer have a longer period in terms of returning that process, we need to make sure that our validation window considers that as well. But yeah, it's definitely a good question, and something I think we've actually seen the news pick up on. So I've seen The Independent cover some stories about consumer rights and being able to return your goods. So it feels like it's definitely a conversation or a hot topic for our consumers.
Thank you for that. I'm just having a look at the questions, and I believe that all of the submitted ones have been asked. I mean, I guess a fun one maybe to finish. Have your consumption habits changed at all during the lockdown? Ros, do you want
to? I always shop online. I always do it on my phone because I never have a laptop in front of me, so that hasn't really changed. I normally do food shopping online, but that is shifting. So we try and do a kind of bigger shop less frequently, and then we are really trying to support the local guys in terms of some of the food that we're getting in. And we're very lucky where I live in Stoke Newington, and we've got loads of local suppliers in the area around Dalston and Shoreditch that are delivering up here. So we're getting bread from Dusty Knuckle, which is one of our favourite bakeries. We've got other bakeries that are delivering flour, which is really hard to get hold of. So we're actually enjoying some of these things that we wouldn't normally be able to get delivered, but they've kind of pivoted and are changing what they're doing. So yeah, we're definitely doing more of that.
That's great. Right, there's not been any new submitted questions, so thank you to everyone who submitted questions. I'll hand you over to Ros to close off the webinar.
Thank you, Alex. So yeah, it just goes to say again, many thanks for joining us today. If you'd like any further information, you can contact us at the email address on the screen, uk-clientpartnerships@awin.com. We've also got our dedicated coronavirus hub, which can be found on the news and events section of the site /coronavirus. We're going to continue to do this to dive into the Awin data. We'll be publishing further articles and hosting webinars in the future, so do keep an eye out for the next ones. Thanks and goodbye.